These young salmon are some of over 100 million that each year start their journey down the Columbia River and out thousands of miles into the Pacific. But scientists say that America's salmon are at risk of becoming extinct. On this edition of Scientific American Frontiers, we're looking at the future of the ocean's long-distance travelers. In the Northeast, can biologists figure out what makes Atlantic salmon tick before the last few rivers lose their wild fish? In the Pacific Northwest, will elaborate engineering save the Columbia River's salmon? And in the Atlantic Ocean, scientists are beginning to understand the giant bluefin tuna. But will the rest of us put that knowledge to good use? I'm Alda. Join me now as we plunge into a deep crisis.
This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Inside this building, there's a small food processing company. There must be thousands like it around the country. Nothing special about that, right? Well, in fact, what goes on in here is really special. And when you think about it, really surprising. Because what they do is prepare meat from wild animals for shipping to the shops and markets where we'll all buy it. Let's take a look. That's right, fish. Fish are wild animals, with some exceptions, which we'll get to in a minute. 10,000 years after humans domesticated cattle and sheep and pigs and figured out how to cultivate crops, we're still out there hunting down wild fish to put on the table. Today, seafood is the main source of animal protein for about 1 billion people around the world, and its importance is growing rapidly. Fish consumption has gone up 5-fold since 1950, and it's still going up. The results are not hard to imagine. Marine fish stocks are being overfished, and they're declining fast. What to do about damaged fisheries is a terrifically complicated question. It involves many interests: industry, fishermen, environmentalists, local economies and livelihoods, even foreign policy. But this program is going to concentrate on what all those interests need to know before they start to argue: the science. We have to know how fish behave, where they feed, where they breed, before we can begin to figure out how best to conserve them. We're going to concentrate on 2 kinds of fish that we in America love to eat: salmon and tuna. Even though salmon farming is big business, wild Atlantic salmon are now officially endangered in the U.S. And even though millions of young Pacific salmon are raised in hatcheries in the Pacific Northwest, several species of wild Pacific salmon are officially endangered too. We'll look at the work of biologists on both coasts who are now trying to determine how wild salmon can have a future. And we'll look at the efforts to study the giant bluefin tuna, another long-distance ocean traveler. Studying bluefin is especially challenging because an individual fish may range over enormous distances, across the entire Atlantic, for example. Scientists are just beginning to find out about the ocean wanderings of the giant bluefin. Even something as basic as counting fish in the wild hasn't been attempted until recently. And guess what? Everything we discover comes as a surprise. Okay, let's dive into it. How long have you been coming out here with the fishing boats?
I started on tuna in 1993.
It's early on a summer morning, and I'm going fishing with Molly Lutcabbage, a marine biologist. We're licensed to catch giant bluefin tuna, but we're also licensed to attach satellite trackers to them. And there aren't many charter boats that can say that. Fishermen have been leaving this harbor for over 300 years, but it's only in the last 30 that anyone's gone after giant bluefin. How do you know when you're near a place where you're liable to catch a fish?
Sometimes you see the fish jumping or see them on the surface. Sometimes just a lot of banging of birds, maybe.
We're heading out to the giant bluefin's summer feeding grounds. In the 1970s, a gold rush developed for bluefin, which are in demand for sushi. They can weigh up to 1,500 pounds, so a single fish may be worth thousands of dollars. The record is $173,000 for a fish caught near Japan. 50 miles out, we begin to see dolphins and whales. It means we're in the right area.
We often actually track tuna that are following whales. They sometimes accompany fin whales or humpback whales. So most fishermen are very pleased to see the fins of the whales because it's a sign that the tuna may be there as well.
Bluefin are ocean travelers. We know they feed here in summer and spawn in the Gulf of Mexico in spring. Across the Atlantic, we know they feed off the coast of Africa and spawn in the Mediterranean. We're on the Italian island of Sardinia. This is the village of Carloforte. Everyone's shown up for a celebration of spring. The 500-pound giant bluefin showed up to spawn, but the fishermen's nets were waiting, as they have been every spring for maybe 2,000 years. The traditional matanza, it simply means the killing, is celebrated in many Italian fishing villages. Many Mediterranean countries have traditionally fished for tuna, but with the coming of industrial-scale fishing in the 1960s, traditional gave way to modern. Catches shot up and quotas were imposed on both sides of the Atlantic. Back in the Gulf of Maine, we've had a strike on one of our lines. The quotas were based less on bluefin biology than on how many had been caught in the past. Now, biologists like Molly are trying to build up a scientific understanding of bluefin. High-tech tags like this one are one of the key tools. Our bluefin's putting up quite a fight.
It's about 150 pounds, so it's small.
Our 150-pound fish is 4 years old and half the legal size for sale. It won't spawn until it's reached 8 years. The official estimate is that there are up to 20,000 tuna over spawning age in the western Atlantic. The tag has to be anchored into the strong tendons around the dorsal fin.
Wait for the shot. Nice one.
The tag was placed perfectly, but then it was decided the fish was likely to be in poor shape after the long struggle. So the catch was brought in to end up on the table. One non-commercial keeper per trip is permitted. Over the last 5 years, the boat has tagged about 50 fish for Molly. The tags are designed to record where the fish go, then at a preset date automatically release from the fish, float to the surface, and upload their data to a satellite. They're called pop-up tags. Pop-ups have revolutionized research on ocean travelers like bluefin. We no longer have to make guesses about their habits based on where they happen to get caught. But you still have to catch a fish before you can tag it. And for that, scientists like Molly depend on fishermen. These guys don't have to take Molly out for free or stay out after they've reached their 2-fish-a-day bag limit. They see the value of good information. They know in the long run, it's the only thing that will preserve bluefin and jobs. Soon after we caught our fish, we almost literally ran into another boat that Molly works closely with.
Yo! Hey! We got it! We got one!
Actually, they were just dropping off some fresh bread. This is a commercial tuna boat that uses nets. They're interested in good science, too.
Thanks for the bread. Good luck! See you guys! It's a vital part of our research program is the fisherman partnership, and not just recreational fishermen, but you can clearly see that the commercial fishermen here have been the backbone of our studies for years. And they've really given us our primary fishing and tagging platforms. They've done it, for the most part, on a strictly voluntary basis, and they brought all their expertise to the table, and we didn't have those skills, and we couldn't have done this work without their input.
Molly first began working with tuna fishermen in 1993. They were convinced, based on what their spotter planes saw, that there were more fish out here than the official estimates. Of course, fishermen always make claims like that, but here was a chance to really check out their story. Molly and her colleagues decided to simply count the tuna, using aerial photographs and a mapping system that they set the spotter pilots up with. Every summer for 5 years, the pilots handed in their pictures, and Molly's team laboriously counted every fish they could see. The results surprised even the fishermen. There were huge numbers. On one single day, 17,000 fish were counted just in the Gulf of Maine, about the same as the official estimate for the entire Western Atlantic at the time. But could they have counted the same fish in different places? And also, how many fish might have been out of sight below the surface? So next, they marked fish with acoustic tags and followed them. The aim was to measure tuna swimming speeds to eliminate double counting, and also to assess typical diving behavior.
We found out that they travel anywhere from 24 miles to, say, 30 miles in a single day, and that they spent less than 10% of their time in a single day at the surface where we could see them.
They spend less than 10% of their time at the surface. So does that mean on the day that you photographed 17,000 fish
Right.
in one part of the Atlantic, that might have only, the chances are pretty good that was only 10% of the fish in that area?
Well, we don't exactly know what percentage,
Or do they all
but
go
you're
down
right.
at the same time?
You're absolutely right. It showed us that represents only a small portion of the population that's going to be in the area, because we know that we're only seeing a tiny slice of the water column at the surface.
We're out on the commercial tuna boat we saw earlier. Molly's team now estimates that there are up to 65,000 giant bluefin just in the Gulf of Maine. The research headed off a move to get the Western Atlantic quota cut in half. She was popular with fishermen, but environmentalists said she was irresponsible. The Western Atlantic quota is about 10,000 large fish a year, which it's believed is sustainable. This boat's quota is 50 tons, about 200 large fish. The fishermen are happy to help Molly with her pop-up tag research, even though letting some fish go means it takes longer to fill their quota. In the last 5 years, this boat has tagged nearly 100 fish, more than half the tags put out by all of Molly's collaborating boats. The last few fish in the net find they're not going to end up as sushi. It's probably fair to say that Western Atlantic bluefin fishing is under control. It's well regulated, and catches are reasonable. Things are different on the other side of the ocean. We're back in Sardinia, where Italian scientists are preparing to take advantage of the Matanza to tag some bluefins with pop-ups. The bluefin quota in the Mediterranean and Eastern Atlantic is enormous and probably unsustainable, 20 times the West's. That's because of history and politics, not science. For years, catch quotas were based on the assumption that eastern and western bluefin are separate stocks. But scientists from both sides are now telling regulators they have to think again. So far on this side, they've got results from 23 pop-ups. Here are all the results to date. Molly's, the Italian groups, and also those from a Stanford University group that tagged fish off North Carolina. The clear evidence of the pop-ups is that tuna go all over the place, sometimes right across the ocean, and across the theoretical dividing line that's used to separate eastern fish from western. Has this radically changed what we know about tuna?
It's absolutely radically overturned what was thought about what bluefin did.
Oh, in what way? To what extent?
Well, and I suppose the biggest point is that the fish are mixing at a much higher rate than was ever believed. So we immediately learned that these fish are not following the rules that everyone laid out for them.
Yeah, right.
And that there's no line down the middle of the ocean and that they hit and they turn around.
Yeah.
So that was an eye-opener to, I think, fisheries biologists and managers, because they realized that what happens on one side of the ocean affects what happens to the fish and the population on the other side.
So it could be that large catches in the east are being fed by good conservation in the west. If that's so, there'll be political problems down the road. The pop-up results offered another eye-opener. Many fish ended up in the spring in the wrong place.
Giant fish that we assume were going to spawn after they got nice and fat and ready to go, they should have been in the known spawning areas during the spawning period, and that would be the Gulf of Mexico or the Med. And for the first 3 years in a row, none of the giant bluefin that we tagged here were in either known spawning area during the presumed spawning period.
So that suggests that there's some area you haven't identified yet.
It raised the question, is it possible that bluefin are spawning elsewhere?
Or do they just take a break?
Or do they take a break?
Yeah, right. It's amazing how much there is to learn about these. And you've been studying them carefully for years.
Absolutely. I think that our independent tagging studies have only raised more questions about what bluefin do for a living.
You can be sure that Molly and her fellow scientists are going to be raising questions about bluefin and about salmon for a while. Regulators are going to be uncomfortable with the process, and fishermen may or may not welcome the results. But the bluefin and the salmon could at least come out of it with a future. Come visit us at PBS Online. Scientific American Frontiers can be found on the World Wide Web at pbs.org or America Online, keyword